Good morning, afternoon or evening, wherever you are in the world, and welcome to the back row from What I Watched Tonight. My name is Matt Hudson, and this is my retrospective series where I look back at a film which I bloody love with somebody else who really quite likes that film as well. And tonight's film is actually quite indicative of my guest, who I shall introduce to you now. He's the best-looking fella from Bristol. He's a unit and a legend. It's Terrelle Graham from TerrelleGrahamReviews.com. How you doing,
Hello.
mate?
Thank you for welcoming me on the show. It's a pleasure. And I'm looking forward to talking about what is my favourite film.
That's it. Well, we're talking tonight. Actually, we'll get to that in a minute. Firstly, for those listening, they're probably thinking, well, who's this daddy? It's Terrelle. Well, tell everyone who's listening, what do you do in like the film within your film review bubble and tgreviews.com? What's it all about?
So for people that aren't aware, I started reviewing films like 11 years ago, and I started that through YouTube, and I carried that on for a long period of time for probably about a good 7 years consistently, then shifted to like a website blog, which is TerrelleGrahamReviews.com. The YouTube channel is still there, and I am actually planning on revamping that very soon and restarting that, and that's under the same name.
Views on some of those videos.
Yeah, and that's the thing, and I kind of wish I never stepped away from it, but that's what's kind of luring me back in, is being able to just talk on camera again. So that's kind of how it's been. But then, so over the past few years, it's kind of been on and off over the past year or so because of like the pandemic things.
Yep.
But I've been kind of doing it all through the blog mainly. But yeah, it's because you kind of can't, and I imagine the same for you. You kind of can't, once you've got that passion for film, you kind of can't step away for good because you always find yourself being drawn back to the discussion.
You can try. Every now and then I think, you know what, I just want to watch films. I don't want to write about them or talk about them, which is odd because I can talk for England. But but as soon as you get it, it never really goes, mate. And the good thing about Terrelle's YouTube channel is you can chart from this baby-faced lad up until now. You can see the evolution. It's great.
It's kind of crazy. It's crazy for me as well because sometimes I'll look back on some of the videos and I'm like, this is almost just like, it's the same as like taking pictures when you're younger. It's like I've got like a chronicle of me at the younger, and in fact I've probably got more of me at that age through YouTube than pictures.
That's it. They're the ones that you hope your mum doesn't show your girlfriend when she comes round. Gosh, that haircut. Well, I mentioned that the film is indicative of Terrelle. I've spoken with Terrelle a few times on various incarnations of these shows, and tonight we're talking about The Return of the King, which is exactly what this is. The Lord of the Rings, The Return of the King, the third part of Peter Jackson's epic Middle-earth saga. So before we find out everything that Terrelle thinks about this film, let's dive into the admin. So it's distributed by New Line Cinema, released on December the 17th, 2003, and it was directed by Peter Jackson, Sir Peter Jackson, and it stars, amongst others, you know who, Elijah Wood, Sean Astin, Viggo Mortensen, Ian McKellen, Andy Serkis, Christopher Lee, Liv Tyler, Orlando Bloom, John Rhys-Davies, Bernard Hill, Miranda Otto, Billy Boyd, Dominic Monaghan, Hugo Weaving, and most of the Southern Hemisphere. It was made for $94 million, but it brought in $1.142 billion worldwide. And even better, it's nominated for 11 Oscars, and it swept all of them. It won every Oscar it's nominated for, including Best Picture, Best Director, Best Original Screenplay, which is always good for a fantasy film, and a lot of technical awards as well. It was a clean sweep record. No film has ever won that many Oscars in a clean sweep. So The Lord of the Rings, The Return of the King is one of the most decorated films of all time, and thankfully me and Terrelle think it's one of the best. So why is that, Terrelle? Why is this one? What is it about this film which ranks that highly for you?
I think a lot of it's, well, not in a, because it can be a bad way when you say it, but a lot of it's nostalgia, but like in a good way, because I remember I first saw the film at cinemas back in December 2003, and I think I was only like 9 years old. But I had already kind of been invested in the Lord of the Rings trilogy up until that point. I saw the first one on VHS for the first time, I think.
Nice.
And then I saw the second one in cinemas. And then I still vividly remember the experience of my dad taking me to watch the third one. And I remember the trailers from back then as well and all the hype leading up to it. And it was one of those things where it was almost like just like the perfect... I don't even know how to describe it. Like there's just the perfect kind of assortment of things that just came together and it just all worked. Like on almost every level in a way that a film as big as that usually wouldn't. Like usually when you've kind of got a trilogy of films and it's coming to the conclusion, they usually buckle under the weight of all the character arcs and things like that. And I found that even like at that young age, I found that Lord of the Rings it seemed to just withstand it all. But then it had so many memorable moments that just stuck with me as well. And I felt like I always have moments in like history, like Jurassic Park. The first time I saw that, I remember that very vividly, for how that affected my imagination and made me think about, what's possible with film.
Yes.
And Lord of the Rings was one of those major things again, and I just remember being in awe, like the whole time watching that film for the first time.
So 9-year-old Terrelle was in awe. So so how does 20-something Terrelle now watch it? Do you watch it now with a critical eye, or do you just think, no, I'm going to let this wash over me and I'm just going to enjoy the hell out of it?
It's kind of both, but mainly the second. Like, it's kind of like, it's got to the point now where I've kind of, the critical eye has assessed it so many times that it's like, right, yeah, I know it's near perfect. Now I can just enjoy it every time and get lost in it. Like, every time I put it on now, usually it's a kind of Christmas tradition for me, so I'll put it on every December, and that's mainly just because of like the tradition of them coming out every December. And it's always the extended edition now, and I just get lost in it every single time.
You actually answered my question, then, mate. Ever since I've watched the extended editions of all three of them and the Hobbit films, I can't not watch them anymore. There's nothing wrong with the theatrical ones because they're the ones I saw, like you, first in the cinema. But when you see just what those extended ones add, man, how can you not want to watch those films? So when I rewatched Return of the King for this episode, of course I was going to watch the extended edition, mate.
Yeah, it's. I don't think I've actually seen the theatrical ones, at least for over 10, maybe even since I saw it. I can't really remember because I'm sure they released the extended ones like about a year after the cinema run. So yeah, I don't think I've seen the theatrical ones since then, to be honest. And it's one of those things where the way I describe it to people is it's like, you could argue, some of the stuff in the extended versions is not necessary. It's just kind of extra detail. But then when you love the story and the world and all of that as much as, say, we do, it's like that extra detail that does really matter. But I find more than most, the Return of the King actually has some very pivotal pieces of information that weren't in the theatrical cut. And some kind of little interesting threads that it doesn't really harm the theatrical version that much without it, but it does add so much more when you put it in together.
There's a couple of scenes which I'm sure we're going to get to, which even like some of the actors took umbrage with them not being in the film because they are pivotal. But before we get into the next hour and a bit of basically saying why this is just unreal, I think I already know the answer. You're already on. Actually, I've got two questions. The first one is, well, you're on the show for this film. Is this the best of the trilogy? And secondly, is this the best trilogy of films of all time, or at least one of them?
Yes and yes. It's for me. I think it is for the same for most fans, but it's hard to almost rank the Lord of the Rings films. It's so easy to just treat them as one because they're shot together. It's one continuous story. They're all great, and it's easier to just. But if I was to try and split it, I think for how this one just made me feel and the reaction that I had watching it and all the memorable experiences and nostalgia, I think this one's the number one film for me out of them. And then the trilogy as a whole, to me, is the best trilogy easily. Yeah, I agree. I think it is. I love me some Star Wars. I love me some other trilogies that have done very well as well. But this is damn near perfect as a trilogy. I've done the other two films on separate retrospective episodes, and I think everyone I've been on with, Luke and Anders, have both said the same. This is damn near flawless trilogy, and like for the reasons like you said as well, it's filmed back to back to back. This film, Return of the King, took a year to shoot. Sorry, that's almost unheard of. And it's just crazy. Like whenever you go back and watch like the behind the scenes and things like that, and when you think of the actual risk they took to make these films all in one go with the budget, and then just to when they didn't really know if it was even gonna, because especially around that time, like a lot of fantasy films were kind of flopping around that time and not really landing. So for them to just take the risk, and there's some interesting stories around the history of getting the film made and what Peter Jackson did with the scripts to draw out different people's attention in order to get it made. And I think there was a story about, I think one of the studios wanted to make it in one film, and then he was campaigning to do it all in across the three. And then I think, I can't remember if it was one of the studios then saw the script and they realized, actually, we need 3 films to really fulfill this.
Yeah. You just had the Star Wars prequel trilogy starting then. The Harry Potter was around then, so sequels or series of films were kind of on vogue at the time. They were in, and you can't. I mean, The Hobbit, you could argue, could get away with, 2 films at a stretch, but this book, I read this book as a kid. This book is a tome, man. It's huge. You can't do this in one book. It would be like The Dark Tower from the other year. That piece of crap with Idris Elba and McConaughey, which I can't believe I'm saying. Those 2 in a film was bad, but yeah, it was. It would have been like that. And we wouldn't be talking about The Lord of the Rings any way like we are now, because it would just be, do you remember when they tried to make that Tolkien film a book and it was rubbish? Can you imagine a world where it was made into one film?
Yeah, and then it also is like the domino effect of Lord of the Rings and how that influenced the rest of the industry for like forever, and fantasy films and war films and just that epic fantasy kind of style. It's like, you take that away and it's like so many films we've got since then wouldn't be the way they are. So and look what it did for New Zealand as well. How I don't know who doesn't want to go to New Zealand on the back of watching these films. Definitely on the list. Like it's
on my bucket list. It's been on there since about 2001, I think. 20 years later, I'm still waiting. But
who knows when we'll get there? But
dude, I just want to go to Hobbiton, man. Go to Hobbiton, see some of the scenes from from this film, and I would love that. But what it did for New Zealand, what it did for digital effects, and obviously the massive technology, that literally called massive technology they use for the battles, where every single competitor, if you will, had their own AI about them. They were all intuitive, and it wasn't just hack slash. They fought against each other as if they were real. What Peter Jackson managed to do, and the use of CG and augmented CG and practical and miniatures, and the fact that it was pretty much all shot on location. I mean, this film had an insane amount of visual effects, but sometimes you see them, sometimes you don't. But that doesn't take away from the fact that it's an amazing achievement of filmmaking. And like you said, sometimes you get a third film which doesn't quite stick the landing, The Rise of Skywalker, but sometimes you get others that do. But then again, I love me Star Wars. You could say Return of the Jedi as well. Some people didn't. Revenge of the Sith did, but this was just consistent across the board in terms of these 3 films.
Yes, and every time I watch it, it kind of just blows me away from that aspect. Like it's very rare and Lord of the Rings, you could argue, more than any other film, or most, has more plot threads and more characters in this location and that location. So it's got more work to do to weave that all together. And I honestly don't even know how they really accomplished it. Like, it must have been such a difficult and daunting task to try and stage this entire film and get all the moving parts together and to work and to edit and to cut it. And then it just, I'm so glad that the film, they got recognized for it by the Academy afterwards, because and I feel like that win and that sweep was almost like for the whole trilogy and just for the entire work. And it's kind of like I was even watching I don't know if it was this lockdown or the last lockdown, I can't remember. It's all becoming a blur. But I was going back to the appendices and watching some of the behind the scenes stuff, and I've never seen, and I remember, and this is another reason why these films stand out to me so much, is growing up, these films were such a big introduction into the film industry and how it works, because I used to watch all those behind the scenes documentaries on the DVD. And even watching it now, you kind of realize how much of a team effort, more than anything I've really ever seen, these films were, when it even goes down to like the costume departments, and they're making the weapons, and they're making, the Uruk-hai armor and all of this stuff. And then they're putting that on, like, I think it was like the New Zealand rugby team or something like that. Like, it
was like the army, wasn't it? In that,
and it's things like that, and just the amount of dedication. But then, like you said, it was almost the love for the location and how they kind of gave back to New Zealand with the production. And it was kind of like a great partnership. And not to this scale, you rarely ever see film productions, like the location in which it's shot becomes synonymous with the film, like it does with Lord of the Rings.
That's a great... Peter Jackson's obviously mental as well. He's just clearly a head case to be able to take this all on and actually see it through. But it's spot on, though. New Zealand is Middle Earth almost now. They even said it, like, you couldn't imagine a more perfect place. On one hand, you've got these massive, lush green fields. Then you've got these kind of creepy-looking forests. Then you've got the green fields, the lake, and on the other side of that, a massive snowy mountain, like a glacier place. It's unreal. And
it's just got it all.
It literally has it all. And you can see why half the cast bought up apartments and houses there, because, Jesus, why wouldn't you after spending a few years of your life there?
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah, I wish, but yeah, on the special edition, sorry, the special features on the DVDs, they're some of the best of all time. And I mentioned the prequels before, that they had some of the best as well. That was just an era for great behind the scenes footage, and especially these films. They had like 2 or 3 discs just dedicated to how they made the film. Director interview, cast interviews, people who worked on the film, they all got involved as well. There was blooper reels, there was gags. It was like a real diary of a moment in life, a snapshot in these people's lives, and you can only imagine how these people changed from start to finish, like how they started when they got the gig to how it all ended. And can you imagine? Can you put yourself in like one of their shoes and just be like, you walk home and on your wall is like, Lego Orlando Bloom's got his bow on the wall, and every time you look at that, you'd be like, God damn, I did that. That must be the coolest thing.
It's this, and once again, it's that thing where I can't imagine, but I can only try and imagine what it's like for them to like see what it became, because I can guarantee none of them expected it to be what it was, and to be a part of that must be just so. It must feel like such an honor to be a part of that. And then going back to like the DVD extras, that. The film set the standard for films, and then the extras set the standard for extras. Because every film I watch now, that's like of a large scale, like Avengers, things like that. I'm kind of expecting that level of extras on that, and they never really ever reach it. I think the most recent one to do it was, and it's a shame because I didn't really like the films. I didn't really care for the documentary. Was The Rise of the Skywalker. They had like a 2-hour, I think, documentary about the behind the scenes. But even those ones those are extensive for what we tend to get nowadays, but they're still nowhere near the level, because the Lord of the Rings ones it literally starts from pre-production, and you see them when they're rolling up, right? We've got a script, nothing else, let's get going. And you take the journey with them throughout the whole production.
Peter Jackson was like 12 when he started, and now look at him. But, you're right. Nowadays, special features, they are crap for the most part. You may get a director's commentary if you're lucky. You'll probably get a trailer, maybe off the film that you've just watched. I don't really want to watch a trailer for it.
Yeah, it's like nowadays with YouTube. It's like if I want to see the trailer, I can just hop on YouTube.
Exactly. The Rise of Skywalker had that cool documentary. The Last Jedi had that great documentary from Rian Johnson. Had a ton of deleted scenes, but that's really what you get now, is deleted scenes, and you might get a few extras. Whereas, these Rings films just went all in. But speaking of going all in, let's do it. For those who haven't listened to Retrospectives before, welcome, by the way. We're about to go full spoiler into The Return of the King. If you haven't seen one of the most lauded films of all time, go and give yourself half a day, watch it, come back and listen to Terrelle and myself dive into it, basically. So one last time, this is your spoiler warning. And what we're going to do is talk about what's so great about this film for the next hour or so. So, Terrelle, The Return of the King, what's one of the moments that stands out for you out of all of this film?
I feel like it's an underrated or overlooked moment of the film, even though it's such an important part. And it's the whole kind of Minas Morgul sequence with Frodo, Sam, and Gollum, and they're climbing the staircase. I've always loved the visual aesthetic of that sequence because of the green and the blacks and how that just looks visually. And there's the level of suspense, and it was kind of you very briefly. You almost saw like the horror tendencies from Peter Jackson come in. I remember there's like a gargoyle statue. Yeah, there's a particular shot that lingers on it, and it's got this very creepy atmosphere to it. But just that whole, especially in the extended version, just that whole sequence as it plays out, and it plays out over a large portion of the film. I just always find myself gripped by it and just involved with it. And there's the great sequence where the Witch King comes out, and the whole army gets kind of unleashed, and you see that begin. And then there's the whole drama with Sam and Gollum and Frodo on the side of the staircase, which is a pivotal part of the story and a pivotal part of, I think, one of everyone's like first favorite character moments from the film, with Sam when he returns to save Frodo.
And that's for my old gaffer. Yeah, right. No, mate, that one of Minas Morgul. Yeah, you're right, because before in the Fellowship was a much more grounded film, a lot more. Like the color palette was a lot more natural. It's very, very much on location. The Two Towers got progressively darker, and then when we get to something like Minas Morgul, it's black, and it's just like not quite fluorescent, but it's this gothic kind of green lights floating. We hadn't seen it before in the trilogy, and then you see the Witch King of Angmar coming out, and he's got. We wouldn't even call it a legion. It's like a country's load of orcs coming out. And I feel like, how are they going to do this? And the fate of the ring, as we know from the other two films, rests on, well, Frodo and, of course, the real hero, Sam. And they've got Gollum there. And then they've got to climb that staircase. And we know Gollum's up to something because, beginning of the last film, him and Smeagol had a little chat. Yeah. So it's that moment where, oh no, we know that something's going to happen, but the characters don't.
Yeah, that's exactly it. And and going back to the army part of that sequence, it's kind of like it's one of Peter Jackson's strengths and something that he's kind of set the standard for again, which I feel like no one else has ever really kind of reached. It's just those kind of pre-battle shots of armies and military forces advancing on their position. Scale. Like, it's almost like if you think of, I don't know, like Rome Total War, the video games, or I don't know, how when people play Warhammer and you've kind of got those top-down views of armies, you get that so much throughout these films, but then as it's coming towards the climax, you're kind of getting it from all sides, and it's that alone, as you're watching the films, kind of building the anticipation towards the big, finale. And then when it goes to, like, say, the Gollum, Frodo, Sam element of it, it is that kind of moment where you know what's going down and you can see the manipulation happening, and then it kind of breaks you to see how Frodo just doesn't see it, and Sam kind of takes the negative end of it and gets sent away. And what I love about... I was always drawn to the whole Shelob aspect of the film, ever since the trailers, I think, because I think there's little snippets in the trailers. But one moment I do love, and it is about the two towers, but the end is that moment where Smeagol's talking to himself, and he's talking about bringing them to her, and it's like, who's her? And exactly. That's so ominous and scary, and it leaves the two towers on such a ominous and frightening note, and then to see it pick back up in this one, they've really handled it really well.
Well, then you got a year to wait, because this was 2001, 2 and 3. Yeah. So, and you assume, as you probably would, you'd think, right, it's a woman of some sort. Is it like Galadriel's like evil opposite or something like that? Is that what it's going to take to get this? Or is Sauron a woman? You don't quite know what's going on here, but it's even worse. There's a massive spider, which I hate spiders. I hate the damn things. And so seeing that in the cinema with that bastard coming out, it was so well done. Actually, I know they modelled it on actual spiders, so they got the movements just right, and the kind of the way it very slowly brings itself out of the spider hole.
And I think it was actually whatever spider they modelled it after was the one that Peter Jackson feared the most, I think, as well. So they modelled it after what scared him the most. I've always loved the reveal scene of that, where you've got all that build-up, and then it's that one moment where he's got the light shining, and you just see the leg move behind him, and then the spider just runs out, and then all hell breaks loose.
I wonder if Peter Jackson, by doing that, kind of cured his fear somewhat, because obviously spending all that time looking at it, you probably think, well, the ones in New Zealand aren't like 50 foot tall, so it's fine. It's not too bad. But
spending days on end on the massive sets with spider webbing and all that stuff as well.
Oh Jesus! I hate spiders, but I love that moment. I love that scene, the whole thing when they get into Cirith Ungol and the stairs, and like you said, it's that foreboding atmosphere. Not only have we just seen the Witch King and his armies, we know that Gollum isn't. We know he's not who he pertains to be, and he's leading them to her. We know it's her, so we know something's about to go down. And then there's this massive spider, and we think everything's going to be okay. Frodo manages to escape. He hacks himself out of the webs, which is a horrific scene. He falls and he falls down a chasm. Sorry, he kills Gollum. We think throws him down a chasm. Great, we're fine. Frodo's going to escape, and then of course he doesn't.
It's kind of that. I love the. It's almost like such a peaceful scene, even though there's something so horrible going on. But it's like I don't think for most of that sequence, I think there's no music. It's just the sound. And
the music is when he starts wrapping him up.
Yeah, and then that's when it kicks in, and it's like it lets you really take in the moment of when he gets kind of stabbed, and then him getting kind of poisoned, and then wrapped up, and then obviously you get the great shot of the sting entering the frame, and then you kind of realize, oh, Sam's returned, and that's just such a great scene. And I think most people that love the film would always kind of say, or even love the trilogy, most people have Sam up there in their kind of top character somewhere, and this is like his defining moment of the trilogy. Well, in fact, he's got a couple actually, because he's got a couple later on as well. But this is the turning point for him as a character, which then leads him down to being that heroic figure to really make it happen towards the end when it needed to.
Well, that's what I love is that when we first meet Sam, he's a bit of a joker, and he's like, "I'll come with you on this jolly jaunt," and then he stops in the fields and says, "If I take one more step, this is the furthest from the Shire I've ever been." And now we see him here, like not giving two Fs, bringing this sword out to fight a massive spider to save his friend or to complete the mission. That's how he assumes. And I remember seeing that scene in the cinema. Watching Frodo get stabbed. Obviously, we don't. You see him from like the chest up, as we don't see him get stabbed, but we know he does. We hear it and we see it. So I'd read the book, but I totally forgotten. I was like, "Damn, that's a hell of a 2/3 of the way through twist that they just killed him off."
He's off, yeah.
I generally thought they did. I completely forgot about the book. I hadn't read the book for like a decade or so. I thought they killed him.
I can't remember what I thought at the time, actually, whether I kind of thought I remember, I thought Gollum was gone. With that sequence, I thought, okay, that's Gollum out of the picture for he's gone, he's dead. But yeah, I can't remember what I thought with Frodo. But going back to Sam again, it's kind of that thing where I can't remember her name, but in the beginning of the story, he doesn't even have the courage really to go and speak to the woman that he's attracted to. And then it's kind of at the end of this story, he's got the courage to then fight off a giant spider. So it's kind of just like growth as a character. And
I love that.
He's come a long way.
He necks his pint and he's like, "Right, you're mine, Rosie." And the Hobbit's faces are like, "Oh, Jesus, mate."
Yeah.
Well,
nothing can stop Sam now.
Yes, nothing's going to stop him. Mate, I love that. Like I say, the scene of the hand was Peter Jackson's apparently when it comes into frame. But I love that because, he's got the light of Lorien or the light of Galadriel. I love that, the fact that he fights off Shelob, and like you say, that's it. Sam is now the hero of the trilogy, pretty much. Without Sam, Frodo's dead a few times. Frodo got stabbed by the cave troll in the first film. He got stabbed by the Witch King, and now he got stabbed by the spider. He's bloody useless.
Yeah, he's been through it.
Yeah, he's had better weeks or years, but this is. I love Sean Astin anyway, but. At the moment when Sam realises that Frodo isn't dead, he's just been paralysed, I love that as well, because then he's like, you fool, Sam, you fool. But we don't know he's got the ring until later on. I love that moment.
Yeah, and even in the whole, and this is why this film's so good, because we've kind of started with one scene, and we're kind of then trickling through so many in the process, but then even the scene that follows after that when he goes to save him, in the extended version, is so much more in depth. I can't remember the name of the tower that they go to after.
The big one.
Yeah, but
I can't remember what it's called. Yeah,
and like that. I remember that location very vividly from the game, because the game explored that. There was a whole level based around that section. Obviously, I didn't realize it was cut from the film originally, but then in the extended version, seeing that whole sequence realized again. There's a few freaky moments in that as well, like where I think it's when Frodo first wakes up and he's kind of regaining consciousness, and then he realizes that he's surrounded in enemy territory, and Sam's obviously got to then come in again and be the hero, and he does it again.
He jacks that guy from behind as well.
Yeah.
And you get to with obviously Frodo's half naked, but you get to see the scars of where, not just where he was stabbed on Weathertop, but the ring. Obviously, the ring is worn down so much. You get to see like where it's almost burnt into his skin.
Yeah, it's a very interesting visual, because it was just in that one visual you kind of understand the burden and the weight of carrying this all this time, and how it's kind of taken its toll.
Yeah, and Sam's got it, and he's like, "Sam, I must finish this." And for that brief second, he sees Sam. It's like he kind of he holds the ring for himself before giving it back eventually. The ring is seductive. It will seduce everyone. Not even Sam, the hero, is immune to its charms. But honestly, mate, asking the best moments of this film is just ridiculous. I mean, there's so many. I've got like a list.
Talking about the whole thing.
Exactly. So you might as well have said the whole thing. Bye. I've got a list longer than my arm. Some of them are just quotes, man. Some of them are moments, but I'll save some of the bigger ones. But one of the ones I liked was another quite quiet moment, but it's before the big battle. It's before the final battle with where Pippin and Gandalf are together. And Pippin said, I hate waiting on the edge of the battle. And he says, and during the battle, Pippin says, I didn't think it would end this way. And Gandalf gives that speech where he says, the journey doesn't end here. Death is just another path, one that we all must take. The grey rain curtain of this world rolls back and all turns to silver glass. And then you see it, white shores and beyond, a far green country under a swift sunrise. Oh man, well that isn't so bad. No, it isn't. I ain't Ian McKellen, but the way that him, Gandalf and Pippin have that back and forward is amazing. Gandalf, he's almost got a tear in his eyes. He's looking into the distance, like, death isn't so bad. What lies beyond it's not bad, and it almost revitalizes Pippin as well. Pippin smiles. He's like, it's not so bad. Whatever happens here, we're going to be okay. And I love that. And this film's got so many little moments. A lot of them have around Gandalf, but a lot around Aragorn, of those little character speeches. And when you see them on screen, they're like the most goosebump-inducing moments in any film.
Yeah, and I find that like the writing is so powerful, because it's like that scene in particular. I know that's a scene that a lot of people will take those words and apply it to real life, whether they're like grieving over someone or something like that, or they'll apply that to give them comfort in the real world. And that's when the stories become real powerful. Then is when you can kind of help someone through the material and then what their characters are going through, and they can relate it back to them in some way. And kind of, I think that's why that one stands out. I think that's probably one of the more, out of the whole trilogy, one of the more powerful kind of dialogue moments in that kind of way. That's always just stood out.
Yeah, and at this point as well, and Gandalf hasn't got a lot of hope in this film. A lot of the time he's saying, there isn't any hope, or I feel like this is going to be futile. And I mean, later on in the film, like, he even says to Aragorn, it's only a matter of time before the ring falls into the hand of Sauron. This is Gandalf the White kind of saying, look, let's have a battle, but at the end of the day, it's not going to mean anything because Sauron will win. And then he gives this speech as well, and it kind of revitalizes himself, I think, as well, because he'd lost hope, which is interesting.
Yeah, and there's a few brief moments, just very brief moments, where you can kind of see it in battle. Like there's that moment where the trolls are attacking the door, and he doesn't realize, and he's trying to get the whole army to kind of brace, and that door swings open, the trolls come, and you see his face is like, oh, okay. And it's just little moments like that of gold, where it's like, yeah, you can see the fear. Someone who you would expect to be leading everyone with the optimism is kind of so fearful, and that kind of drives home the weight of the situation that they're in. I
think that's quite good though, because if you do make him just an immortal wizard, there's no stakes. If you know that nothing scares the dude, then that moment's great. Whatever comes through that gate, you will stand your ground as men of Rohan, men of Gondor, and then those come through, and even he's like,
yes, I'll change your mind.
Retreat. I think I had someone call me out back. Yeah, carry on, lads. Yeah, over to you. I like the fact that they didn't make Gandalf this unassailable being. He wasn't unkillable. And then the extended editions, and that he's almost taken out by the Witch King as well at one point. So that's interesting. And again, that little things like that I like. And Aragorn himself he's not infallible as well. He at the end almost gets taken out if it wasn't for Frodo destroying the ring. Aragorn would have had his head lopped off as well. And there's so many moments involving Aragorn. But what else have you got, mate? What else are you thinking about Return of the King?
Well, just following on from what you said there, I think it's such a simple thing, but then like a lot of films just don't do it nowadays, like you said, where it is just showing vulnerability in the characters, because that is like a gateway to the development, so they can kind of develop and move beyond that further down the line. But then also, if you're trying to drive home the weight and the emotional weight and the odds of survival and things like that, if your characters are all kind of like happy going through it and they're all fine and they all feel optimistic, it's kind of going to lessen the impact of those type of moments. Whereas almost everyone in this film is kind of pushing forward, and once again it goes back to those type of things that you can relate into real life, that I think people take with them and keep with them. It's like everyone's pushing forward. They don't really believe that they're going to do it, but they're just pushing forward anyway. And by the end, they do it, and they kind of surprise themselves in doing it. But it's that kind of, it's having that willpower to just push on, regardless of the odds, regardless of like lack of hope and things like that. Everyone was just, and half of them didn't know where Frodo was, if he was even alive still, but they just kept the hope and kept fighting as if he was, and they got to the end.
Well, it stands to reason, like you mentioned with that quote from Gandalf, that you could apply that to real life as well. In any way, it might be that, do you know what, I want to lose weight or something, but I don't want to put myself through the hardship, but you do it. You hold on to hope like these guys did. I mean, there's probably better examples, and you push through, and the results will be there in the end. You don't have to fight Sauron, but you may have your own personal battle with Sauron in your head. But yeah, that kind of idea of just like pushing on against all hope. Even if you feel like the odds are against you, just go at it. And here, it worked. We won. The Fellowship of the Ring made it through, and we got a bloody happy ending. But honestly, I struggle to find individual parts of this film which don't just amount to, like you said earlier on, like whole sections of the film. There's so much, but I love that moment. What about yourself, mate?
Another scene that stands out, and that's going right to the other end of the film, is the start where you see Smeagol kind of become kind of Gollum, and you see the power of the ring and how it kind of just took over. That lust for the ring took over. And yeah, just seeing that there's just a few creepy brief shots of him kind of mid-transformation into Gollum that are pretty interesting. But I thought it was a good way to open the film, showcasing kind of Gollum's origin in that way, just because although we've been aware of it up until this point, we hadn't really seen it. And I think seeing it in action with the visuals kind of drove that home as well, in terms of what kind of has made him what he is now and why he's still trying to fight for the ring. And I think you kind of needed that bit of story at the beginning just to kind of be there when you see the conflict between Gollum, like at the very end, and the ring, when they get to the climax. But I think it was a very effective way to start the film.
Yeah, it humanises Gollum as well, because when we see him, he's just like a sort of grotesque little gremlin type thing. Yeah. And then we see this, that actually, because I mentioned before, and there was that extended edition scene as well with Frodo, where they show him what would happen to Frodo if he kept the ring, and he's turning into a Gollum. And it's Peter Jackson utilising his horror skills there quite well. And yeah, it humanises Gollum, and it gives us a little bit of sympathy for him. Even though by the end we're thinking, come on, I want Sam to like just gratuitously murder this thing. But during it, little moments, you kind of start to feel a bit of sympathy for him, because, he wants the ring, but he was just a guy. He was just a dude who was a hobbit as well, no less, who was seduced by the power of this thing through no real fault of his own. Yes, he succumbed to the power, but everybody, even Galadriel, couldn't take it. So how was, Smeagol himself going to do it? So from no fault of his own, this became his fate. So that scene is a great start to the film as well, and it also kind of humanises and gives us something to cling on to, that maybe this Gollum fella isn't so bad, but obviously, as it turns out, he was just wanted a ring.
Yeah, and it's one of those things that I think, once again, it's an example of something they did so well, because it would have been easy to just paint Gollum from the start as just a villain, straight villain, and that's it, and just go down that route, whereas you do have that kind of duality to him, where you sometimes you feel sorry for him, and sometimes you're not on side with what he's doing. Yeah. And I think by doing that, it's manipulating the audience to kind of not know, you don't know where you stand with Gollum as you're watching it for like the first time, because you're just not too sure. Like, the film's kind of giving you certain information that kind of makes you empathize with him, and then other stuff, and you're kind of like, and then that's why it kind of, I think just the way the film in general just handles all the character arcs is just so well done. Because they all, even if you look at them, most of the characters are from not even if you look at the trilogy, just from the start of this film to the end, almost all of them have their own arc that kind of develops into something, even just from this film alone. And he manages to do that at the same time as then putting like one of the best battles ever put on film in amongst it all, and still weaving those and developing those arcs throughout the battle.
It's mental, isn't it? Because you're right. Actually, even the other two hobbits, which often get overlooked, Merry and Pippin, and quite a lot of the time I have to write next to which one was which, because I always get confused which one was which. But when I think it's Pippin looks into the Palantir, like the bowling ball, and Sauron sees him, Merry's like, "You always have to look. Why? What is it of you, basically?" And Pippin's like, and Merry's like, "No, you just don't understand, do you, man?" So we've seen Merry he now understands fully, and then later on, not long after, Pippin soon realises as well quite what's going on. I love that. But you're talking about sympathy and empathy. Jesus Christ, what about Faramir and his daddy Denethor?
And that's such a good aspect of the film, and well, a good aspect of the film, but then that character is so so despicable.
Fella. Do you wish he had survived and I had died?
And
yes, I wish that.
And then one of my I've got so many of my favorite. Well, it makes sense because it's my favorite film, but so many of my favorite shots ever are within this film. And when he first walks out and sees the army for the first time, and the war that's going on, and the fear that brings into him, and he believes that he's been betrayed and abandoned, and there's so much powerful moments with that character as well that help amplify the situation, because you feel when you see that visual that he sees, you kind of get the same reaction. It's like, wow, this is really going down right now, and it's right on the doorstep. The war is here. This is it, and it's like, who's here in this battle to fight with us?
Yeah, and because Denethor, he's not asking for aid from anyone. They've got beef with Rohan and vice versa, and when they all come up to Minas Tirith, I love that. I love that shot when you see his face. And you realise that because he's just been, he's the steward. He's not even the king. He's just a caretaker, and he's just been, abusing his position basically. And when he sees that army, he's like, it is that kind of very quick realisation that we're all screwed now. Basically, we are in trouble. And from then on, it's Gandalf takes charge, doesn't he, of the whole thing from then on.
Yeah, and it's almost that kind of moment where he kind of realizes that he's kind of been blasé about this whole scenario, despite the warnings, despite Gandalf, trying to tell him, and then it's kind of just, all hits within that moment. But then how he treats his son in this film is kind of, that's what kind of just fuels the hatred towards this character. But then it once again, and especially I think there's a few extra, I can't remember them specifically, but there's a few extra moments in the extended version which kind of tie it back in with Boromir as well.
Yes. I love those
kind
things.
Of fulfills that arc as well. Although Boromir's been gone since the first film, it kind of just makes that come full circle in a very interesting way, that being someone that hadn't read the book and was just watching the films as they were coming out, I never really would have expected to see Boromir's brother or father, and seeing that kind of whole dynamic of how, there's the favored son and the one that's kind of just nothing to the father, and trying to prove himself and willing to almost go out and die in battle just to try and prove himself to be an honourable son.
I love those scenes of Boromir, man. Yeah, you're spot on. And we get to see that Boromir loves his brother. We see him in those scenes where he's almost kind of like, not against his father, but talking against his father behind his back, Boromir, in Faramir's defence. And, Denethor hates Faramir as much as he can't eat a tomato properly. That man can't eat, he's chomping all over his face. And again, I hate people who open their mouth when they eat, and that, I was like, right, I hope he does go for that.
It's like, forget everyone else, that's enough to make me hate this character.
Exactly. The way that scene, I wish you had died. And when Faramir is knocked unconscious and we all think he's dead, because he goes back, because basically he's sent to recapture Osgiliath, and he says Osgiliath is overrun, we cannot take Osgiliath. And Denethor was like, basically, your brother would have done, and maybe if you come back I can reevaluate how I see you, but it depends on the manner of your return. And so Faram is basically sent on a suicide mission. We think he's been sent back dead, and Denethor goes mad and tries to kill himself and Faramir on that funeral pyre, doesn't it?
Yeah, and then that whole scene's a very great one. And then I love the climax of that scene with him just running on fire off the edge of the tower, and then we kind of go straight back into the battle again. It's like, well, that kind of section's done then. It's like, it's such a brutal end to, but you know how it is in films where you've got characters you dislike, and it's like you want to see them go out horribly, and it's like that was a very fitting way for that character to end, given how he was to everyone in the story.
Close your mouth when you eat, mate. Well, maybe let's think. He jumped off that. He jumped off the pier, shall we call it, and he's fell to his death. And you got to imagine he took out a few walks on the way down. So he contributed in some way. Let's try and give him some kind of positivity. But and before that, when Pippin has to light the beacons, and that beautiful shot of the beacons being lit across all of these landscapes, and the music, and obviously Aragorn's, like the beacons, Gondor calls for aid, And Rohan will answer, "Yes, son, yes."
It's just such a, and that's that, like the music of this film is a whole other beast. Like I consider the music of this franchise to be the best score as well. Like my favorite score that's ever composed.
It's incredible.
And the reason for that is because throughout all three of the films, it's like most of the key tracks in the soundtrack for this whole trilogy, one film would be lucky to have one of those songs as their theme song to be an iconic song. It's almost like there's 10 tracks worth of iconic music per film with this franchise. And it's like almost every piece of music you hear is almost some iconic in its own way. And that's very rare in itself.
Yeah, exactly.
For a film franchise. But yeah, for that particular scene when they're lighting the beacons, it kind of does give you that hope. The music kind of gives you that moment of hope and that kind of kind of giddy excitement because you start to realize what's gonna happen in terms of the battle and where things are gonna go. And yeah, it's just another powerful moment.
Yeah, and I've mentioned on the other ones that the music is what Howard Shore managed to do was. You mentioned that New Zealand is synonymous with Middle Earth, which is synonymous with New Zealand now. These pieces of music that Howard Shore created feel like they came from Middle Earth. It doesn't feel like they came from Earth. They feel like they belong in the world of Tolkien and in that realm of Middle Earth. It's what Howard Shore managed to do was insane. And like you've obviously got the Shire theme concerning hobbits, which is one of my favourite of them all. It always makes me smile. You've got the Riders of Rohirrim. It's such a bonkers epic tune, especially in this film when Theoden and Eomer arrive at Minas Tirith with the Rohirrim, and Theoden gives that big speech, and he starts shouting "Death, death," and then the music hits when they all start going, and I can feel I've got the goosebumps, man. It's the Rivendell. Oh god damn! But even when we get down and deep into Shelob's lair, the music takes a turn for the real sinister. So it's fantasy level, but he also knows when to get down and dirty as well.
Yeah, it's just so versatile. It's so versatile in terms of just the scope of music that he made for it, and like you said, just each individual scenes. It kind of when you've got the more scarier horror elements, it leans into that kind of more sinister music. When you've got the more hopeful kind of things, it leans into that, and it's so well in that regard. And then that also reminds me of Pippin's song as well in the film. It's such a beautiful moment. Because I believe that's cut to Faramir and Osgiliath, I believe.
Yeah, that's obviously
so you've kind of got the bleakness of what's going on there with the beauty of the song, and that juxtaposition of the scene is just such a well done. And it makes me kind of realize he's definitely like this is almost Pippin's movie in a way, like even more so than Frodo and Sam, and to some degree, we're almost on the same level. Because it really shines a light on him in a way that you haven't seen yet. And like the hobbits, those Merry and Pippin were kind of sideline characters before, still important, but sideline characters, and they still did have their big moments in the Two Towers. But in terms of like on an emotional level and just for the pure character development, I feel like Pippin gets a lot of it in this film, and the spotlight between him and Gandalf kind of is on him a lot.
Yeah, because he pledges his loyalty to Gondor or to Denethor, doesn't he? And hence he's in his service. And it is that scene. We joke about it, but obviously the way Denethor just slovenly like pig of a man on this fake throne, the way he eats, the way he treats people. Pippin singing this song to him, and tears in his eyes. At the same time, he's just sent his son to death, basically, or if not death, to might as well be. And the whole time he's just slovenly sitting on that throne, chucking his food away like that. It's the arrogance of the man that the way he went out was the perfect way for him to go out. It was a high key death, but a low key ending. The way, like you mentioned, the way Denethor flings himself off the edge, and then it kind of just cuts back to the battle. We just sort of kind of see him falling in the background. Like you said, almost as if like, right, that's the end of that chapter. Now let's get back to what's really going on. And Peter Jackson does that so well, manages to combine all these stories together. And I think what you're saying about Pippin's interesting because I haven't really heard that before. And it's true because Pippin sods up by looking into the Palantir. Sauron sees him, but because of that, he's now able to say to Gandalf, actually, I've seen the plan now. By messing up, he saw the plan, Merry kind of is annoyed at him. They go their own way. Pippin then pledges loyalty, and he fights in the Battle of Pelennor Fields. Merry goes up as well, and how they manage to weave this in, and at the same time you've got Aragorn and his struggles because he's becoming the king. He's becoming the king. He takes up the sword of his ancestors. At the same time, he finds out that Arwen is dying. She didn't want to leave Middle Earth because she saw a future with Aragorn that involved a son. The age of elves is over, but she stayed behind, and so Aragorn's got that to deal with, as well as the fact that he's basically got everyone kind of resting on him to win this damn thing, and that's just another side plot. Gimli and Legolas get theirs as well. They were comic relief and some great action scenes, and at the end they have that wonderful moment at the Battle of the Black Gate before they start fighting. But how they managed to weave all these storylines in, and I know it's different from the books, and that's even more of a commendable that Peter Jackson and team managed to do it. But I'm at a loss for words, because as soon as you said what Pippin was up to, I was like, damn, man, you might be right, the way they've weaved in Pippin's story, because Sam is the obvious choice. Sam carries Frodo to Mount Doom almost, but Pippin had his own arc, and it's a very emotional, few emotional moments in the film, man.
Yeah, and I don't know how it kind of blows me away every time I watch it or think about it. But it's like, and I'm sure we've probably already addressed this anyway. But it's just almost like how you've got all these characters, and they're all in their own right main characters, and the film treats them that way, and it somehow gets away with it and makes it work. How it has, you could argue 5 to 10 characters that you'd say could be the lead character of the story based on their importance. Yep. And it still somehow manages to service all of them in the right amount of ways to make it satisfactory and for it to all to work.
Yeah, it could have easily gone wrong, like you say, the third film in a trilogy. I know it's based on a source material, but it's not 100% accurate, so it could have gone to pot. And I know there are a few moments in this film that some people are a bit kind of like ooh about, and maybe we'll mention some of those at the end. But any gripes I may have had of this film are just completely overtaken by something you said at the top, which was just the awe of the whole thing. There's so many, because people joke about and say, look, there's 15 endings to this film. There's 15 incredibly epic moments in this film which completely overshadow that. Like I mentioned, it's Theoden as they ride into battle, slaps out his sword hitting the spears as he's giving that speech, and him fighting against the Witch King and Éowyn as well. We haven't mentioned Éowyn, his daughter. She's hitchhiked herself into battle, and she has a pivotal moment in the battle, doesn't she, mate?
And it's such and that was actually the scene I was going to go on to next as well. It's such an important. For me, it's one of the most organic. When you look at like scenes with women in film history and strength and things like that, to me, it's one of the most organic ones that exists, and I don't think people really discuss it on those terms.
No,
really.
They do, no.
But it just works. It's just so organic. It never feels forced. It feels earned. And it's just an amazing scene. And and before that as well, one of my favorite, it might be, I'm going to say top 5 instead of saying it's my number 1, but top 5 moments of the film for me has always been when the Witch King and the Nazgul, there's this shot of them just like nose diving out of the sky.
Yeah.
And just wreaking havoc and picking up people and dropping them. And just that sequence I've always loved. I've always loved the music to go along with that. And obviously that eventually builds to the confrontation with the Witch King and Éowyn and yeah, I just found all of that's just so satisfactory, and it's one of those. Is another example of just how that's like a very small puzzle piece in the whole grand scheme of the battle and everything that he was orchestrating. But it's such an impactful moment. But there's so many moments like that throughout the whole thing, and the battle just keeps escalating. I love the escalation of the battle in this film because it starts off and you're kind of in it and it's entertaining. You've got the trolls pushing kind of the armies forth, and they're breaching Minas Tirith, and then it just keeps escalating and escalating and escalating, and I just before you think it's reached this peak, and then another thing happens, and no matter how many times I've seen the film, I'll get to a certain point of the battle and think I've seen most of it, and then Theoden arrives, and I'm like, oh yeah, of course. This part hasn't happened yet. It's like, this is the key part, but it's like so much has happened up until that point Like I can't ever see a battle topping this one ever. I don't think the stars will align for a filmmaker to, because it's not just what you're seeing in the battle that's making the battle, it's the character stuff. And I can't see another film building to that type of crescendo in that way ever again, to make it all work like that.
Yeah, I mean, look, Avengers Endgame had 20 odd films behind it to do that. This has got, and look, and I thought that film was fine. I preferred the one before it, but this had 2 films to get you into the characters, get you into the world, get you invested in their story, get you emotionally invested. And again, I'm not in any way saying this is better than anything that our boy Feige's done. Not at all. Just, basically piggybacking on what you've just said is you can make a battle as epic as you want. You can have as many badass moments as you want. But if you don't care about the people who are fighting, then, you've lost already. You've already lost your own battle. And here, you do care, and that's the most important thing. You care because, firstly, the actors give their all, but they're written so well and they perform so well, and what they're fighting for is right. And Bernard Hill as Theoden. I mentioned in the last episode that I sometimes think Elijah Wood gets, I think I used the phrase short shrift. Sometimes he gets overlooked. I think he's decent in these 3 films. I think he gets overlooked somewhat because Ian McKellen's so good and Viggo Mortensen's great. But I think Bernard Hill is wonderful in these films. And that moment when he looks up and the nosedive and Nazgul's come in, but that moment when he turns around and sees it, the way his mouth almost just drops as if
no. He just knows. And
this is it.
And he's another example of a character that was kind of introduced halfway through the story. You kind of didn't know how significant they would be initially when watching the Two Towers. And then it's it leads into that thing again where we're in the final film now and every character is just getting their moment, and he has so many. And it's okay, this is why you were important to the story. You really start to realize, and it gives better context to everything they've done in the Two Towers to try and get him back to good health, to try and, restore him when he was kind of possessed and things like that. You realize why all of that needed to happen now, because this was why they needed him. And it kind of, and like you said, the scene where he kind of looks, it's that despair and that kind of realization of, I think this is it. This is it for me, but, the battle will go on, but this is, and the way it's all orchestrated with all the characters. And then, like I said, in the same way that I get surprised even when I watch it now, his arrival, that's about to happen. You kind of, so much goes on with him and Erwin and all that in that sequence. And then Aragorn shows up. It's it just
think you've seen everything? Keeps going. I've got an army of the dead here. How about that? That's the speech that Theoden gives when he's finally now I'm worthy of joining my peers. My more. He just wants to be on the same level as his father and ancestors before him. He wanted to be great like them, and he realizes that he is now worthy in his eyes of a place amongst them. And I love that moment as well. We got that moment to have a goodbye with Eowyn, but also his self-recognition from when he started and he was just that possessed old dude on the throne to how he is now. He's the king. He's the outgoing king, but he leaves with honor, and I loved that. But the Army of the Dead. That's something which I mentioned earlier on. That a few people have an issue with the Army of the Dead because. And Peter Jackson was one of them, but then he did kind of use them in the way that he did. But what do you reckon about the Army of the Dead? Because it's a great scene that they only answer to the true heir, the King of Gondor. And what do you think about how they use those green dudes?
I kind of like it, and I think when I was a kid, I always just found it really cool. And I always remember the mission in the video game. And then as I've grown older, I think I've appreciated that kind of story of their kind of story, even though it's very brief. And I've kind of always liked that aspect of it. And then it's kind of cliche, but with a battle the size of this one, you kind of do need that swift reset. Like most battle films, if I think of Phantom Menace as one, where you've got battle sequences and they just shut down the droids, or there's always that kind of almost like the cheat code that, all right, we need to wrap this up. Okay, yep, here we go. And it's that's done now. But I think because so much character stuff was done, so many characters got their moments, and there were so many great moments before in that battle that led up to that, I think I can accept, and I'm fine with how they were utilized in the film, and even for kind of closing out that battle. because we got so much before. Whereas if it was kind of, you mentioned Endgame earlier, and I think that's a good example because when watching it for the first time, you get really wrapped up in it, and it's because of the characters, and the character work is great. But the actual battle itself, if you analyze it, isn't that great.
It's a bit pap, isn't it?
And it doesn't make much sense. Whereas The Lord of the Rings has that structure, and it all makes sense. All the characters get their moment, and then at the end we've got this bit. And I think another reason why I can accept it is because although that ends that battle there, what goes on at the Black Gate is almost another battle which could make its own movie. Like another film would have a battle like that, and that would be their key sequence. Yeah. So it's almost like the film doubles down on the battle sequence later on. So it kind of, I don't really mind how they utilised the Army of the Dead. If
the Army of the Dead came in at the Battle of the Black Gate, and the only reason that the heroes won is because they had ghosts, basically, then it would have been like, maybe I'm not quite so sure about that. But like you mentioned, because that was the battle was to and fro, and it wasn't looking that great for the heroes, but obviously this was just the what swung the pendulum, the moment that swung it. Yeah, had they turned up, but the fact that they had the Battle of the Black Gate to come and everything else after that, then it doesn't bother me as much. In the book they were just described as shadows, and they didn't actually get involved in the action as much as they basically turned up and put the fear of God in the orcs and the bad guys. Were at the sort of point where it's like a Lovecraft type thing where they just lost their minds basically. They lost the will to fight.
Actually, I kind of like. I do like that idea of like it just frightened them so much that they couldn't comprehend what they were coming into contact with.
Exactly it, and they were pretty much faceless, and then obviously Aragorn came with another army, and I think he came with an army of rangers as well, like as he was once Strider, rangers from the north, which is pretty cool. But Peter Jackson said he didn't like the Army of the Dead, but he didn't want to annoy or frustrate the diehards of the book, so he included them in one way, shape or form. So I don't mind it. Like I say, it swung the tide of that battle, but it didn't swing the tide of the end battle.
Yeah, and I also think like it is still he managed to make an important character development moment for Aragorn out of that sequence anyway, because that was him kind of more so coming to terms with his destiny and what he needs to become. And in doing so, that was such a large part in him accepting that and fulfilling that by making that happen, because it was only him that was going to be the one to make that happen. So I think so even if he didn't like it, I feel like he's made it work in his film really well.
Yeah, that sword as well, Andoril. God, that's a handsome looking sword.
Yeah,
from the Shards of Narsil or whatever. That is a babe of a sword. I wouldn't mind that on my wall. And I think I imagine Viggo Mortensen probably took that back with him after film, and I think he did.
Yeah, I'd want to if I was him.
Yeah, imagine trying to get that past Cuss. I think there's actually a story about that. Like, what are you trying to board the plane with this like 6-foot sword? It's a prop, isn't it? I'm Aragorn. Honestly, that Aragorn in this film is just boss. And Viggo Mortensen said that he liked this film. He preferred the first film because it was more location based and it was more the Fellowship were together and it was more of an ensemble. But so I found that interesting. But just seeing him in this film, he's so good. And the only person, not to say that he should have been, but the only person who was nominated for any kind of accolade at the Oscars was Sir Ian McKellen in Fellowship. Nobody else in the saga got a acting nod. And sometimes I do think that the acting does get overlooked somewhat. And Viggo Mortensen, he looks good. He personifies the role so well. He looks great in action. He's just such an awesome action hero. And I don't know, it's not an action hero, awesome hero, but he's also one of the good guys as well. The way all he wants to do is make sure that Arwen is okay. He wants to win this war for Arwen, basically, and for the good of man. But he also looks damn cool doing it. And I think Aragorn he's one of the great. I don't want to call him. What would you call him? Because he's not an action hero. How would you describe?
That's the thing. I was trying to think as you were just saying that. Then I was trying to think of how I describe it.
Yeah, it's like, over to you, mate.
You'd almost say like he almost doesn't even seem right to call him the leading man of the story because he's
a protagonist of some sort.
Yeah, but he once again, like most of the characters in the story, it's like there's a clear arc from beginning to end throughout the trilogy where you see this character be in one spot and they develop and grow and then end in another spot, and there's so many intricate moments on that journey to the end. And once again, this is like so many key elements for him happen in this film. and it all just works. I'm still baffled to this day how they made it all work as well as they did, because usually something falls down somewhere and it lets something down. Usually expect, and like you said, people might complain about the multiple endings, so it's like that's a very minuscule issue. If that's the extent of the issues for this film, with what it had to achieve and what it had to handle, then I think they've done a pretty good job.
Yeah, exactly. You don't like the ending, just make you feel good. Sorry, go and watch Infinity War or something, or go and watch something else. But honestly, I get the joke, but it's the end. All of those endings were necessary, and when you've spent so long working on these films, and the books and the characters and the story is so large, they deserve those big ends. Had it ended with Frodo in his bed and all the Fellowship coming in and everyone's smiling and jumping around in slow motion smiling, it would have been a bit cack. I think it would have been a lovely ending, but
it wouldn't. And a good example to show what it could have been is because I did not like the third Hobbit film, the theatrical version of that. One of the reasons why I didn't get on with that is because the ending I thought was so rushed. It left out key scenes from the book, like a certain funeral that occurs and things like that. But the reason why those scenes being missing were so pivotal was because those were the moments where the character arcs get wrapped up and you say your goodbyes and things like that, and it just wasn't in the film, and it's like, right, so the trilogy just ended here, but I don't really feel like there's a resolution with the characters. The battle might have came to an end, but the characters didn't have a resolution, and I'd happily take multiple, and in fact the extended edition of The Hobbit did fix it, and I do enjoy that version more because they added those scenes back in, but I'd take excessive amounts of ending sequences over too little. Because I think if it's too little, it will harm it more.
Yeah, the characters in the Hobbit trilogy needed some characterization to begin with, to start with. But the extended editions of those films, where, again, especially the first one, there were some really great moments, especially in Rivendell they added, but they almost felt like they needed those additional scenes to make them better films, whereas the Lord of the Rings, all it is just polishing what's already the Premier League trophy. Do you know what I mean? It's just making it even better. Whereas none of our teams would know what that is recently, but certainly mine. But
long time.
In fact, any trophy. But those films needed it. But I'll take all the endings here, mate. Especially with that, and I'm sure there are other moments as well. But that final third of the film, from the battles we just mentioned, and then we've still got to get to the black. We still have the moment of the Black Gate when the gang arrive finally. We know that Sam and Frodo are in Mordor. We know they're there. They've somehow got to get past 10,000 orcs. So Aragorn, Gandalf, and the gang, they go to the Black Gate and they call Sauron out, and it sets us up for that another battle in a movie of battles. And I love the Battle of the Black Gate because from the build-up, the wonderful build-up to the very end, again, it's just damn near perfect.
And it's one of those battles where, well, more so than the first one, where it's like, right, this is kind of all or nothing. Are these characters actually going to succeed with what they're trying to do? They don't think they are. It's starting to look like they're not going to. And the way that I think it's such an overlooked achievement in terms of how Peter Jackson can weave from that battle to the Mount Doom kind of sequences and back and forth with that to keep the energy high, to keep the investment high, and to keep you guessing. And they're both so pivotal to the climax of this story, but he juggles them so well.
Yeah, and if you're not aware of the story, you probably could go into the Battle of the Black Gate thinking, right, how many of these people are going to make it out? Because there's that shot of them being circled and surrounded by the orcs. And then we get the most badass moment of them all. Aragorn steps forward, he looks back, because he can hear Sauron calling him, Aragorn. He looks back at everyone, tears in his eyes, for Frodo. And he just goes for it. And I love it. And then the best part of it, not only is that bit one of the greatest moments ever, is Merry and Pippin. They're the ones who rush first,
that's what I was thinking of as well. And you see them just sprinting into battle, and it's like everyone's just going in for it. And that's the thing. It's like, and you've got two, once again, if you think of war films or films with battle sequences, you usually get one kind of war cry kind of leading people into battle kind of moment. But you get the Theoden moment in this film, and then you get the Aragorn moment later on, and both are impactful for different reasons.
And we also get one from Sam as well in a bit, which we'll get to. He even gives like a rallying cry to Frodo, but I keep calling him bloody Vigo. Aragorn gives his speech as well, but it is not this day. We get that wicked speech. So Aragorn is now a leader of men. He's the leader of men. And in the extended edition, obviously, he lops off the head of the mouthpiece of Sauron. What do you think about that scene as well, Nick? Because
I actually really like it. Yeah, I do really like it because of how it's very bizarre. It's weird, and it's not what you'd or what I would ever have expected. So it did kind of catch me off guard the first time, but then I do like it. But I love the abruptness of the scene and just being off with the head.
Yep, because the way they frame it as well was when the gate opens, it looks like Sauron's coming out, and you're like, here we go. And it was originally, wasn't it, Sauron, before they changed it to that big troll thing.
Yeah, and it's the way they staged all of that I thought was really well done, and it's a shame they couldn't make the theatrical version, but I can see why that was maybe something they maybe left out. The mouth of Sauron, but yeah, I did enjoy that sequence, and it's still one of my favourite extended edition moments.
Yeah, big mouth getting his head lopped off, and then
it's just like horrible teeth.
I know, and that was, and obviously they messed around with them, but all they did was they just enlarged digitally the guy's mouth. I can't remember who plays him now, but he's a guy who was in some horror films in the 80s. He played him. I can't remember his name now, but they just basically that's his mouth. They just digitally enlarged it, and he's got some really odd mannerisms. But I love the moment as well when he throws Mithrandil to Gandalf. He literally just lobs it at his head, like the chain vest that Frodo is wearing. Everyone's just like, is this it? And it's Aragorn again. Gandalf's like, shut up, Pippin, for Christ's sake. And even then, it's Aragorn's like, I do not believe it. I refuse to believe that Frodo's gone. Even then, Gandalf has that seed of doubt in his mind that, we're here for Frodo, but can we really do it? And at the same time, Frodo and Sam have got their moment now. They're free to get to Mount Doom, and then Gollum turns up out of nowhere, man.
And it's one of those things, and it's like, how did Peter Jackson manage to make such an epic scene out of people climbing?
Yeah, I know.
it's like, and just the level of suspense when Gollum shows back up, and it's like, oh, I thought we were done here, but it's like, no, Gollum's returned with a vengeance, and we've got now a fight going on outside, and Frodo running inside, and Sam and Gollum going at it, and then I think the moments inside Mount Doom are just they're so strong, because it kind of, you want to just think, all right, they're going to get in there, they're going to dump it in, game over, but it's like, nope, now you've got all the kind of manipulation of the ring coming back again, and it's like, will he actually be able to let go of this now he's carried it for so long? And then you've got Gollum hot on the heels of him who wants it as well, and it's kind of, it all comes to a head in such a great and grand fashion inside of that sequence.
Sam's been there the whole time, and he's like, just, do it. Throw it in the fire. You could probably do that accent better than I can.
Yeah. Not going to try.
Let me go, God, do it. And Sam gets his speech, doesn't he? He goes, I can't carry it for you, but I can carry you. One of those moments again where you're like, yes. And then Gollum shows up and hits him. But that in Mount Doom is great, because as soon as Frodo puts the ring on, Sauron's eye turns, and he sends everyone to Mount Doom, the Nazgul charge, to go there, and you don't know what's going to happen, and they go over the edge, and don't know how the hell he managed to hold on with his one bloody hand as well, but there's that moment again where Sam says, don't do it, don't you let go, and even now I watch it thinking, he's going to let go, isn't he? You're going to see it in his eyes, he's going to let go, and when I first watched it back in 2003, I honestly thought that, he was going to let go, as if he's going to be like, this is my story's come to an end time thing. It would have been really odd if he did, but I honestly thought he was going to drop.
Yeah, and I think that's just what makes the suspense of the scene work so well, because you kind of, and it's one of those things where I can imagine, even if you've read the book, it kind of, the way it's orchestrated, it does make you kind of second guess yourself and think, well, maybe Peter Jackson's going to change something here and do it his own way. And
does Frodo really does he believe there's anything worth going on for after this kind of?
Yeah, and as strange as it would have been to have done that, I still feel like it would have worked if he did it for some reason, because I feel like that way they've depicted the attachment to the ring, I feel like if it were to happen that way, I could understand why it happened to Frodo, but I'm glad it didn't. Glad it was Gollum instead.
We'd have lost a few endings if that had happened.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. And then another bit following on from that is, Sauron's destroyed, and everyone's cheering, "Oh, Frodo!" And then Mount Doom blows up, and it's another moment like, are they dead? Have they got out of this? And the characters' faces are like, oh no.
Characters can't catch a break.
Exactly. It's like,
every hopeful moment gets shattered.
Can you imagine going all that way, giving all those speeches for Frodo, and then he just goes and gets him blown up?
But that whole sequence, I love seeing the tower fall down and the eye, and the eye kind of almost implodes on itself and just wipes itself out. And you're seeing like lava just shooting from the volcano and hitting the Nazgul and things like that. And there's that amazing shot of Sam and Frodo just sprinting out and jumping onto the rock, and then the lava's just overflowing. And it's all very dramatic, but in a very good way.
Yeah, and they find themselves on that rock, and they have their moment together. Here we are at the end of all things, and again, are they going to get out of it? And then the Eagles arrive. The Eagles save the day again, and I've asked everybody else, so Terrelle, it's your turn, mate. The Eagles. Everyone says, it's the biggest plot hole in the film. It's one of the biggest plot holes in cinema. It's not. Why didn't they just use the Eagles to start with?
I actually don't know the proper reason, because I'm sure I've read somewhere that the book actually gives a proper reason why that just didn't happen. I don't know if it's just because the Eagles didn't have any real allegiance to.
I think it was that. I think it's something to do with. Mordor having some kind of it's just not going to let the Eagles just fly in. I imagine
it's kind of
enter.
Yeah, because you do that and you're going to get taken out straight away. So once again, it's kind of like the whole Army of the Dead thing. So you kind of need to. Like, I'm not expecting we're going to have a fourth film of them walking back. It's just you kind of do have to. People complain about the endings as it is. If the Eagles didn't come, it's going to be a longer film, a longer ending. So it kind of needed to wrap up,
die on a rock.
In some way, and you do get that brief, cool moment of the Eagles against the Nazgul as well, briefly.
It's a good shot.
And I like how that all kind of came together, and it kind of. Yeah, like I said, you needed to move on from that sequence at that point, because so much had happened throughout basically the whole film. Really, was just so intense up until that point. It's like, right, we're done now. So we need to have that moment of relief, and now we can see the happiness and some of the sadness that comes after all of that.
Yeah, you need those moments, and we'd had a major moment of sadness before, where Aragorn firmly put Eowyn in the friend zone halfway through the film. I was like, "Damn, son, you go there." But he's a gentleman. He let her down nicely, didn't he? Once all is said and done, all is good. We then move into like the famous endings from then on, and I honestly, mate, I love all of them. Even the one, where Frodo awakens and like bathed in white, and everybody comes in, and he forgets to say Legolas's name. I love those scenes because it's just joy, it's just happiness, man.
And it feels like it ties back into Fellowship. Like the first scene when you see them together, it feels like it comes full circle from that moment, just to see them all back together again. Yeah. After completing the mission, because you kind of forget. When watching, you get so wrapped up in the story of these films, you kind of forget how separated everyone is after that first film.
Yeah,
like, and everyone's all in different places, and you don't really see them together again. So I think that moment, it needed to happen. In the same way that I say The Hobbit kind of didn't have that closure, this film needed those scenes to really give you that kind of closure. Because if you never got to see the Fellowship together again as a whole, it just would have felt a bit strange.
Yeah, and to then not move on and see Aragorn's coronation would have also been strange, because the whole trilogy, from Aragorn's perspective, was him, ceasing to be the Ranger and becoming the king. And if the last thing we saw of him was, just in battle on his arse and then kind of looking really happy at Mount Doom, it'd have been like, what happened to Aragorn? And then we see his coronation, and again, that's a great scene as well. Aragorn becoming the king in front of everyone and finally being reunited with Arwen, and obviously the scene with the hobbits. Again, what a great moment that is as well in this film.
So you bow to no one. It's just such a powerful moment, and it kind of it works in two ways, because it works in terms of the characters, the story, but then it also just feels like a victory lap for all the actors in the and everyone in the production.
Yep.
Almost like it's like, yeah, we've reached the end now, and this is it. And it's almost like it could be the final day of set, and it's like everyone's just applauding everyone for everything they've achieved.
That's a good point, actually. And I just like Aragorn. At one point, he starts singing during his coronation. And do you reckon there was a moment like somebody in the crowd was watching, and he sort of nudges his mate, and he's like, "What the fuck's going on up here? Was this dude singing?" Took a turn. But I like that moment. I like the fact that Aragorn just Viggo Mortensen as well just embraced the role so much that he learnt this language, this Elvish language, and these songs, to really, portray the character as Tolkien. Well, we assume Tolkien intended. And I love the fact that we saw the Fellowship together. We see Aragorn's coronation. He is now the king. Everyone's together. We get that kind of final payoff for the hobbits together. You bow to no one. Again, the goosebumps when that theme hits and they all bow, and they have that long shot from behind of everyone bowing. It's just. Even when it's not a battle scene, Peter Jackson knows scope and scale. He knows how to make things feel big and epic, man. And just that scene as well, when everyone's bowing to the hobbits, he just captures it.
Yeah, and it's just such a beautiful scene, and it's just one of those just big moments from the franchise. And like going back to what I said earlier about franchises not being able to stick the landing, it's like that's almost those scenes are almost like a celebration of everything that came before it. And being able to get to that point and it working as well as it did, and then just giving the proper send-off of the characters, closing the arcs. Like you said, it wouldn't have made sense to not see Aragorn at that point, because the film's called Return of the King. So you're expecting to see that happen, and it's such an important thing. And like, if I was to use, I'm going to try and use a very random example for using Star Wars, which may or may not work. I don't know. I'm going to see how it goes. But almost like, if I think of Star Wars, and I haven't seen Return of the Jedi in a long time, so I might be wrong, but those kind of climactic moments where they wrap up the story tend to be quite quick. Or I know it was in Phantom Menace anyway, at least, where it kind of almost jumps to that final celebratory moment, and then the film ends just straight there, and it doesn't really give you the satisfaction of an entire kind of arc's worth of character development and story when it wraps up so quick. Whereas, and that's once again why I like the fact that he kind of indulged in these closing arcs for all the characters to make sure they just got the finality they needed.
Yeah, he's like, you mentioned stick the landing. Peter Jackson's, well, here's 7. At least some of them are going to stick.
Yeah.
I know it's a good point. Return of the Jedi's got a wonderful ending, but once you get onto Endor and they're all having a little party, literal party, it is kind of like, it is quite quick. It's no dialogue and it's all music, the victory celebration. And I love the moments, but it is quite quick, and it kind of gets to the end where they're all together smiling, and then it fades out, and written and directed by Richard Marquand, aka George Lucas. Whereas here we get, like you say, we get a prolonged goodbye, but it's a celebration as well to the characters. We see at the end Gimli's there right next to Aragorn's side as he's having his crown put on. Legolas arrives, but he's also escorting Arwen as well. What's his name? Hugo Weaving. Elrond's there. Everybody's there. Carl Urban, who we mentioned. Carl Urban's a boss in this film. He's there. Faramir's there with Eowyn. Everybody we've seen already who's still alive is there. The hobbits. And then we get back to the Shire, and I love those moments in the Shire as well when the 4 hobbits are in the, I'm assuming, the Prancing Pony, and they're having their pint, but it's quiet, and they've almost got a kind of look on their faces as if to say, like, this is, what do we do now? After everything we've done, here we are again, where do we go from
there
here?
Is to do in this life. It's like we're the heroes, and it's like, how do we go from that to just normality again?
But also everybody in Hobbiton, nobody knows they're the heroes as well, so.
Yes, that's a true point. Yeah, so it's kind of that, it's an interesting situation for the characters to go back into, but it's one of those. Yeah, it's one of those moments where I just like the way it's all done. I don't know how I really ever expected it all to end. I don't really remember my expectations before watching it, but I think it was just so beautifully done how they kind of wrapped it all up, and to see the characters return back to the place where they never really left originally. Yeah. now having kind of conquered the world, and for Frodo as well to have done that, and Bilbo had done it in the past, and he'd kind of done it again. Yeah, I think that was done very nicely, and then you kind of get the sad ending with Frodo saying goodbye.
Man, well, we know what Sam gets up to in the meantime, but well, dude, when they go to the Undying Lands, every time I watch it, don't go, Frodo. It's just, and again, that also feels like it could have been the last day of shooting kind of shot, where Peter Jackson being a sadist was like, right, for the final shot, I'm going to film you all saying goodbye to each other as you literally all disband as well.
Yeah, this is the last day of set. We're saying goodbye, but I'm going to film it, and this is going in the film.
Yeah, do it a few times, actually, please, as well. But it's like Frodo. I read somewhere of him kind of like dealing with PTSD. He couldn't ever get over what happened, and obviously the fact that he got stabbed enough times, and obviously the psychological and mental effect of what he went through with the ring, that leaving for the Undying Lands where he could live out his life in forever, basically, was the only real way for him. But what a way to end the film. I also like the fact that they have one last little scene after that, but what a great way for the Hobbits as well, because we've said goodbye to our primary ensemble, but we started in Hobbiton and we end in the Shire for the most part with those 4 Hobbits. And that is the perfect way for the film to end. Yeah, look, it would have been great to end on a Phantom Menace style shot of everyone together at the coronation, sort of dancing and clapping, but it wouldn't. But the fact that they ended with the 4 Hobbits was perfect. And then obviously Sam afterwards, but them all saying goodbye to Frodo was perfect, man.
It's nice to just wrap it up that way, exactly how you started, with the key characters that you started with, and it kind of just brings that entire massive journey full circle, and just to then see how that's impacted them afterwards. And then that goodbye really does, because that goodbye just hits home, because for the fans and for the audience, you're saying goodbye to the characters in that moment, just like the characters are saying goodbye to themselves. And then the actors will be saying goodbye to the characters. So it's kind of like there's multiple levels of goodbyes in these endings that just resonate on all levels for everyone involved and everyone watching.
And I think they all were, and we get to say goodbye to Bilbo, Ian Holm, God rest his soul as well, and Gandalf. He's obviously going to the Undying, so everybody gets their goodbyes. And when Frodo's writing the book at the end, there's a little bit where apparently it says Sam became the mayor of Hobbiton. Apparently, that's what happened to Sam. But I kind of wonder whatever happened to Merry and Pippin. What for you then to hypothesize? What do you reckon they went on to do? After Frodo's gone, and from that moment on, they all kind of walk back. What do you reckon those two guys do?
I feel like they're just chilling, enjoying their food. And there are other activities they get involved with. With. Yeah,
booze and food.
I feel like that's them. Yeah, just living life.
Sam was the mayor, and he had a wife and kids, and those lot just hung out outside. They're like Weatherspoons at 11 a.m. They were just
exactly there. That's them.
I fought next to some talking trees. Give me this one. Yeah, that's basically what they're like. Their pissheads are back. But I always kind of wonder what those dudes get up to, and I do that with a lot of films. I've said it on a few shows. I always wonder what characters do after a film. I don't know what, it's just that little thing. Like, I wonder what Gimli got up to, or Legolas, because everything in the world is fine now. What do you do? Like, Frodo couldn't. He had to go to this place. What do you do after this? Obviously, Aragorn was king, so he had his own responsibilities. I always kind of wondering, what do people get up to?
So when you save the world, what happens after that?
Exactly, yeah.
Like, how do you move on?
Yeah, and to digress somewhat, these Marvel shows are kind of doing that on TV. They're kind of showing what happens after such a massive thing, and
just the PTSD, the mental breakdowns, it's chronicling all of that, and that's why I appreciate the ending that Frodo got, because it did kind of, whilst the film itself as a whole, you could say, got its happy ending, it wasn't exactly just a cookie cutter happy ending for all the characters involved. And in some ways, it was a happy ending for Frodo and things like that. But then at the same time, you kind of realize that the price he had to pay was just the weight and the toll it took on him, and almost not losing himself, but kind of submitting himself to the ring and realizing that he's never going to be the same again after that experience, but doing it for the greater good of the rest of Middle Earth.
Yeah, and we know Frodo, certainly Sam, but they kept thinking about the Shire. That was what kept them going. But by the end of the film, not even the Shire was enough for Frodo after everything he's seen, and that felt real. Obviously, in the context of like looking a bit deeper, that felt real. That there is consequences for events, and I like the fact that they didn't just all go back and everything was just happy and they all just got hammered. I like the fact that there was that kind of those ramifications and mental toll. It can sound a bit grim, but like you say, it's bittersweet that Frodo couldn't ever, not even the Shire could save Frodo, but he got a happy ending, and the Hobbits, they disbanded, but they're going to be okay, and that's what I took from it. So it was a happy ending, mate.
Yeah, man, and what a ride! It's just it's crazy, and like, every time I watch it, it blows me away just every time, and it's one of those things you kind of expect yourself to just get used to it by now. Like, this is the film, I've seen it a million times. Yeah. This is how it is, but you start to realize how unique it is in terms of how it pulled everything off, and and over time you just see more and more franchises come to an end, and you almost it's an unrealistic expectation to hold them to the standard of this film, but you almost want to see films get as close as possible to it, and many fall short and some get a little close, like in terms of emotional impact, I'd say maybe Endgame did get kind of close in terms of what it did with the characters, but then like I said, the battle side of it wasn't actually that interesting when you look at it in detail. So there's always they always fall somewhere, whereas this one just didn't. And like the whole trilogy just didn't, for some, somehow they were so good at what they were doing. They just did it all.
I've heard those guys have talent. They must do. Was there any other like of your like favourite moments or sequences you want to shout out before we move on to anything else?
Is everything going to come back to me? It's once again, it's kind of just the whole thing. It's just the whole experience as a whole, and just the way everything kind of builds together to the battle, and then moving on from that, and just you really feel, especially at the start of the film as well, you really start to feel like this is it. Like you feel the weight of the war and what's coming and what this all means for Middle Earth and the survival of it. And it's built up so nicely in those first two films that when you get to this point, it can kind of just indulge in the climax just in full scale, and they just did it so well.
Yeah, can't argue with that, mate. And I'd be remiss if I didn't give Gimli his moment in the sun, and Legolas, because I mentioned that they got their moments in front of the Black Gate. Gimli, never thought I'd die fighting side by side with an elf. What about side by side with a friend? I could do that. It's a great moment, man.
And it's just their duo throughout the whole trilogy as well. It's just that's one of the most memorable things, especially when I was younger watching those films, is them, attacking orcs and keeping count, whether it's Helm's Deep or in this film. And those were the moments that, the cool moments that you always kind of stuck with me. And obviously, the Mumakai and Legolas and him taking down the whole thing, and just all of that was just incredible. It still only counts as one, It's just comedy. It's comedy gold, but it just makes sense. It's the characters. They've developed those characters and done them so well that it's just the characterization of each character and how they are. You just know it down to a T, as if they were your own friend, and just seeing them kind of interact is just always gold.
Would you like me to describe it for you? Or should I get you a box? Great. And we all know that the gang afterwards, they all got apart from John Rhys Davies, they all got the tattoo of the Fellowship tattooed on themselves. John Rhys Davies, he didn't, because he hasn't got any tattoos. He didn't want a tattoo, but his stunt double got one instead. And that shows that how much this meant to the people involved, that they all wanted to be bonded. And of course, John Rhys Davies speaks glowingly of this. He did burn his Gimli prosthetics because they gave him rashes and they took hours to put off. He loves
stuff like that I think about, though, like the dedication to these roles, because they'd be, and you see it in the documentaries, they'd be up at like 4 a.m. getting their makeup done. Oh, man. To then do a 13-hour day.
And you're away from your family as well.
Yeah, and I always think, like, how do you even have the time to... Because it almost takes 2 hours, I think, to take some of this makeup off half the time as well. So it's like, imagine doing the 14-hour day after sitting in the chair for 2-3 hours in the morning, and then at the end of it, you got to sit in there for 2 hours just to take it off. To what, nap for 5 hours and then get up and do it again?
Yeah, it's like, great, I'm glad I'm getting paid half decent for this. But yeah, because John Reese, he said it gave him rashes and everything, and he hated the prosthetic. He said that was the worst part of it, is he just couldn't stand it because it made him feel, and I said he's still apparently got like the scars now where it just did him that badly. But he's part of
it's very very hot, especially in the type of costumes they had to wear, and like the beards and things like that. I imagine it's just so hot in those costumes and in those makeup. And to be in like locations where there's the sun and the heat, and it must have been horrible.
Yeah, and a lot of the time it is fairly physical. They're either fighting or running or at least moving. It's not often that they're standing still in these films, apart from the quieter moments in like the great halls where they're discussing battle. So it was a test, and 2 years is a long time. You think, 2 years, but if you think, this last year's been horrific for everyone, and that's only 1 year. You think, imagine doing that again.
Like 2 years, and you're just away from home, just in New Zealand, just for 2 years, and you're kind of just committed to this project where before the first film came out, you don't really, I'd imagine they wouldn't really know what they're really dealing with and what they have on their hands. And I'd imagine, because I can't remember, did the first one come out, did they finish shooting all of them by the time the first one come out?
I think so. I think so. This was filming, I believe this one was filming in 2000. But that may.
Right. Okay. So
I think so. But
so that must be even more exciting than.
Well, yeah, because once you know that the Fellowship's done, because the Fellowship came out, and I think they went to do like pickups and reshoots on the other films. Yeah. But by then they would have known what they're dealing with. So then you're like, oh yeah, I will be here. But say 2 years of your life, you're away from friends, family, your loved ones, and of course they can fly out to see you, but. And who wouldn't? And I sit there and say, I'd love to live in New Zealand. Of course, it was 2 years in New Zealand, absolutely. But you know what I mean? You could take Terrelle out of Bristol, but you can't take Bristol out of
exactly. You know what I mean? And then it's just once again like just the uncertainty at that time for what they were doing. I'd imagine so many of them maybe didn't have the confidence, or just not even. It's hard to try and. No matter how many times Peter Jackson would have gone over it, or maybe showed pre-visualizations and things. I don't think you could fully comprehend what the Lord of the Rings became before it became what it became. So for them, I can imagine there's a lot of nerves when the first film came out, and then I guess a lot of that would have put at rest. Yeah. And a different type of pressure kind of probably emerged once they realized how much people loved the first one.
Yeah.
So when doing those pickup shoots, I think they really then wanted to try and make it the best. And then, they did, and they made the best thing they could.
Just look at the source material. J.R.R. Tolkien, his work isn't exactly the most accessible. It's not the kind of thing. I don't see many kids, talking about Tolkien, or I don't see many young people, talking about the books of Tolkien and the works of Tolkien. So for these films to, or even to be fair, most people were talking about Tolkien, not because he wasn't at a high standard, but he's still quite a very niche type writer. For these films to blow up in the way they did, based on the source material they're adapted from, a fantasy novel about elves, orcs, dwarves, dragons, and that kind of thing, for this to blow up in the way it did, that's even more testament as well to the filmmakers behind it, to make the perfect trilogy almost out of a source material which I think I'm fair in saying wouldn't necessarily be everyone's cup of tea. You know what I mean? That kind of thing.
And I think it was quite an achievement to do so alongside things like Harry Potter as well, because it could have been quite easy for the attention to just go straight to Harry Potter.
Good shout.
It kind of just was in equal measure across both franchises, and people love both franchises equally. A lot of people love both. So it's almost like they had both of those franchises had direct competition. That wasn't exactly the same thing, but they were going for the same kind of fantasy audience, and they both managed to succeed.
That's it. They were both eating from the same restaurant. And at the same time, you had the prequels coming out. You had the X-Men films coming out. You had the Sam Raimi Spider-Man film coming out. It was a great time for franchise cinema, actually, and sort of kicking things off. But one of the last ones I wanted to mention was the scene of Saruman at the beginning in the extended edition, his death scene. Sir Christopher Lee, again, God rest his soul, he was not amused, in his own words, that moment was cut because he said it was pivotal to the opening of the film, and a lot of that went on afterwards.
And I think he's right. It's one of the more important scenes that got removed, because with the theatrical version, there's just no resolution to the Saruman arc. And then this goes back to, like, yeah, I guess that's one thing you could fault that original version for, which you can fault it for it, but then seeing what they were dealing with, you can understand why they had to do it.
Yeah.
But that's kind of an example of how, where they have kind of left that character a bit open and it was never really resolved. That's what most films end up doing quite frequently when in this position. So it's still a miracle that they still managed to resolve like 10 other characters in the runtime anyway. But that whole sequence I really do like. And I always remember seeing an interview with Christopher Lee, and he was talking about how whatever noise it was that Peter Jackson wanted him to make when he got stabbed, he then, from his war experience, told Peter Jackson, no, this is how it sounds when someone gets stabbed. It's more like the air coming out of you, not, you don't, kind of yell and scream. It's kind of like, almost like a puncture, and it's like the air kind of gets sucked out of you within that moment. So it's more like a gasp, not a yell.
And that's horrifying in itself. The fact that Christopher Lee is, obviously his wartime experiences, he's seen this happen to people, so he can like say, I've seen this, I've had to witness this. This is what it's like. It's quite grim as well.
Pulling from traumatic memories, and it is. It makes you want, especially for someone like a legend like him, and all his acting career and everything that's happened before. It's like it makes you think, like, what have his eyes seen, like in his lifetime.
He's a legend, Christopher Lee was, and we find out obviously he died. Grima kills him, and then he gets killed. But then Saruman drops to Pelandir, the bowling ball, and that's how Pippin finds it. He doesn't just randomly find it; he's got it because Saruman drops it. And I know what you mean about the theatrical cut. The reason I'd give it a 99% of a pass is obviously the theatrical version is the one everyone sees, so you've got to base it on that. Was it in the film? No. Therefore, it's an open-ended plot thread. But the fact that they filmed it, it wasn't an afterthought. They'd actually filmed it. They just didn't think it fit within the runtime. So it wasn't. I look at it almost like Peter Jackson he did it, so he knew he had actually resolved it. But for the benefit of runtime for that particular version, it didn't make it in. It wasn't like they went back 3 years later and reshot the scene so they could put it in to tie up a plot hole. The scene already existed. It just didn't make it in for
it's like it was always intended to be there. So it's not like he forgot, or he just realized later on. Oh, actually, this scene would have worked. If we had done this. It's kind of like he did it all with the intention of having it there, but just for the sake of getting it in cinemas, couldn't put it in.
He woke up 5 years later. He's like, "Fuck, we forgot about Sauron." Home Alone. He's like, "Kevin, Sauron!" And they have to quickly go and release the Jackson cut. So that's basically it for me for that film. Fun fact: The Lord of the Rings: The Return of the King's got 35 letters in it. Therefore, it's the longest title of any Best Picture winner in history. So sleep with that one, guys. But was there anything though in this perfect film? Was there anything which wasn't quite up to the standard for you, or was it all across the board great?
To me, it was for me, and what I love about Lord of the Rings and all of that, it was all across the board. All here. Like I can't, even if I try and search, like we said, like the ending to me, that's not even an issue. What they did with the ending. So even if I try and search for something to nitpick, there's not really anything I can nitpick. It's kind of it all comes together, and that speaks to the whole trilogy, really. Yeah. There's not really anything I can really single out in the entire trilogy as being, this is a recurring problem, or this is an issue that I had. It's just kind of they just nailed it, in my opinion, just from front to back, just the whole thing.
Yes, but it needed to be a bit longer for me. Give me more. Is what I want. I want more endings. I want more battles. I want more speeches. But no, I'm with you there, dude. Sometimes in these episodes there is nothing. I mean, there literally is nothing you can fault. And hey, if anyone out there has something in this that they're not quite as keen on, then I'd absolutely love to hear it. And let Terrelle know as well. We'll give the details of where you can find him shortly. But we'd love to know, did you like this film? No? If you didn't, why? Or were there reasons that we haven't mentioned that, stop this film from being a perfect film for you guys? But I think that wraps up the Return of the King episode then. And Terrelle, thank you for being the literal king returning.
Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Anytime, mate, especially when it comes to talking films like this. We mentioned TerrelleGrahamReviews.com, but where can the world find you online to have a chat with you or talk Lord of the Rings or anything?
mostly active on Twitter, so that's just at Terrelle Graham. So that's just TERRELLE Graham. And then, like I said, so you got the Terrelle Graham Reviews.com blog, and then Terrelle Graham Reviews is the name of the YouTube channel as well. Right now, there's currently nothing on it because I've archived all the old videos because I do plan to just make new content. But then I think what I'm going to plan on doing is, because the videos are still there, I never deleted them, they're just hidden, so I can still view them. So I think I'm going to make like a playlist on the channel of just some classic YouTube videos from like the past 10 years and start trickling those back onto the channel as well. But yeah, Twitter, YouTube, and then the blog is the main spots to find me.
Go and do it. If you don't follow Terrelle, do go do it, because the man has got a lot to say and everything he says is worth it, whether it's film or not, or outside of the film realm. The man's got a lot to say, so do go follow Terrelle. And if you happen to be in Bristol, you'll find him. Everyone knows him.
Yeah. I'll be there somewhere, lurking somewhere.
That's it. You'll find him. So just shout Terrelle and he'll appear. You go check out Terrelle, please do, and tell him if there's anything about this film he didn't like. You can find me, What I Watched Tonight, .co.uk, and all across Twitter, Instagram, Letterboxd as well. We'll actually start putting reviews out at some point, but at the minute I just quite like talking about films whilst we're in the middle of a pandemic. But as Terrelle knows, Godzilla vs. Kong, this is going to date the episode, has just come out. I'm going to be checking that one out in a minute, probably. And Terrelle, he hasn't given me any spoilers off air. He's been a good boy. But as soon as I've watched that film, I'm going to hit him up and be like, right, what was this about? How good was this moment? Honestly, can't wait. But guys, thank you for listening. If you like what you've just heard, if you know there's some Rings fans out there and they want to hear people chatting Return of the King, let them know about this episode. And if you really like it, please consider chucking 5 stars on your podcast provider of choice. It helps the show, it helps get more listeners in, and it helps get more engagement in, which is what we're here for. We're all film fans, so let's talk about film in the right way, in the good spirit, because nobody got time for fools. So thank you for listening, Terrelle, mate. Honestly, thank you again for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
All right, everyone, thank you for listening. But until next time, see ya.